Our guest speaker today, Professor Andy Pardo. Firstly, thanks for joining today's session, which is being hosted by eSynergy Solutions. We're a technology consultancy delivering business value to our clients across all areas of cloud computing. I'm Adele Lewis, and I head up our community team here at eSynergy, which provides services all around community engagement. We have a dedicated community team that help organisations here at eSynergy and different organisations look at how they can raise their technology brand and share their story to engage with the wider tech community. And it's not just external communities and internal communities that we support. And we're really seeing a real adoption of communities of practice playing a big part in enabling organisational change and knowledge transfer. So that's really why we wanted to focus on the topic today. We're going to be joined today by one of our expert associates, and that's Professor Andy Pardo, who has extensive experience setting up communities of practice. And he's going to share with you all today some valuable insights into best practices, challenges, and lessons learned along the way. So just for some housekeeping, if you have any questions, please fire them over the chat box, which you should see on your right-hand bar, and just ping them across throughout the talk, and Andy will get to answer those at the end of the session. We're going to be recording this, so it will be shared with you after by email. So I'm now going to hand over to Andy to begin the talk.
Okay, thank you, Adele. So just waiting to take over the screen, so just bear with me 1 second. Just putting my presentation into slideshow mode. Can everybody see my screen? Okay. Adele, can you see?
All good.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you for that introduction, Adele, and thank you to everyone for joining this webinar today. So I really wanted to sort of talk about the setting up, building and maintaining of community of practices, and really these sort of practices are super important for organizations, really to empower change, to offer skills transfer for your workforce, and also to really help with your innovation activities as well. My name's Andy Pardo. I'm a technologist by background. I've a PhD in artificial intelligence, specifically neural networks. I've worked as a CTO and an MD for tech firms. I've spent about 20 years working in investment banking as well, and through all of that have had a number of opportunities to set up different community of practices. And as Adele says, I'm sort of working now as an associate with eSynergy in the sort of communities practice part of their organisation. So yeah, I've had a number of experiences in setting up community of practices. The main one that I've sort of delivered was actually when I was working at Credit Suisse, and actually set up a machine learning community of practice stroke working group. And this was a combined both IT and business group, and it spanned the entire organization. It went from 0 to over 120 plus people across the organization, and really helped drive their strategy and adoption of machine learning as a firm. And I'll sort of talk a lot more in detail about some of the things from that. Also ran a virtual innovation group which focused on 6 main technologies. Again, that was over 100 people. And as part of that, we delivered a whole number of different proof of concepts that allowed us as an organization to experience some of the newer technologies, understand how to use them and where they might be applicable to the business. have run other sort of expert network groups. I run a global network of meetup groups around artificial intelligence as part of some of my activities as well. So the agenda today, so I wanted to cover a few things really. So initially sort of talk about, so why do you need a community of practice anyway? And then also highlight, why do community of practices fail? So one of the big challenges with these communities is it's relatively simple to get them started, but actually maintaining them and growing them is actually quite a challenge. And I've seen a number of instances where, you get them off the ground, but within a few months they kind of implode, as it were, and they just don't sustain. And, throughout this talk, hopefully I can show a number of things that I've found through experience that really helps to keep the community practice living and alive for a sustained period of time. We'll then go through the different phases. So the initial setup of a community of practice, building it, growing it, and then sort of maintaining it. I'll also touch on some of the sort of things that I did and potentially what I call deliverables as part of that community of practice that seem to be a real powerful way to keep the momentum with the community of practice, and touch a lot about that. Towards the end, we'll talk about the challenges, but I think actually throughout the whole talk, I'll be highlighting a number of these challenges throughout, but maybe I'll just sort of reflect on some of those. Then talk about some of the key takeaways and sort of three kind of major sort of lessons learned, if you like, and then sort of briefly sort of talk about potential next steps for you if you're interested to sort of learn a bit more and get into a bit more detail of how we can help you sort of set these things up. And then I'll definitely save some time for Q&A towards the end. So that's really the sort of structure of the talk today. So why do we need community of practice? Well, fundamentally, technology is changing at a greater and greater pace. And I think as technologists, we all struggle to keep up with the latest and greatest technologies. It seems to be sort of exponential rate of growth in terms of the new tech that's coming along. So it's a real challenge for everyone that works in the industry and works with technology to actually keep up to date with all the new sort of tech, and leveraging community of practice really helps to sort of knowledge share within the organization, and sort of help to lift everyone up to these new technologies. So it's super important, and it's becoming increasingly important to have these kind of internal networks within your organizations to make sure everyone's sort of keeping up to date and understanding where different technologies can be used within your firm. Innovation. This seems to be an increasing focus for many organizations. I think it's certainly powering the new sort of wave of companies and new products and services. So if you're not innovating as a company, you're going to be left behind. And again, because the technology is going at such an exponential rate, it's becoming more and more important to keep ahead of the game and to make sure that you as an organization have a innovation platform and innovation program, and leveraging these different sort of networks and communities to sort of feed into that as well. So that's why it's important. So why do they fail? Community of practices. So actually they fail for many different reasons. I've listed sort of the three that sort of jump out to me. So really the main one that I see is that participants just really fail to see the value in the community of practices. They may join the first couple and find it kind of interesting, but then the enthusiasm just fades after a while, and you tend to see that the attendance numbers just sort of, after an initial sort of interest and spike, after a few months, it just sort of tails off, and people just kind of lose interest. And I think from what I've experienced and seen, they lose interest because they don't see where the value is for them. And I think that's one of the key things or the key challenges that you need to sort of address as part of sustaining a community of practice. Some participants don't feel they get asked to contribute, so some of the people there may already have skills and knowledge on the topic, and part of the skill in managing these communities of practice is actually finding those people that already know a little bit about the technology and get them actually helping to drive the community of practice. So identifying those people quickly is really key. The other key thing to acknowledge with these community of practices, people join for different reasons. So some people will know nothing about the technology and just want to join and listen to hear what people are sort of saying about it, and just to sort of absorb the knowledge that's being shared within the community of practice. And they may not feel that engaged or motivated or empowered to engage because they feel that they're a novice and they just want to learn. Others will just want to see what's happening in other parts of the organization, so they're inquisitive, because a lot of firms work in silos. Being able to sort of see what's happening elsewhere is really important. Some actually want to help and guide the adoption of the technology, and those are the key people for you to identify, because they will become part of the core community and really help you sort of drive that forward. And potentially the community of practice might fail just because you aren't able to get a large enough group to be part of that community initially. So for me, those are the sort of key reasons why a community practice fails to sustain, essentially. So the initial setup, so there's lots of key things really to sort of think about. I've listed a number of them here. So one of the key things is actually using word of mouth and actually using any internal sort of blogs and social media platforms that you have internally to kind of spread the word. When I set up the machine learning working group at Credit Suisse, I think our first meeting we had like 3 people, and it was, very small start. But I leveraged those people to sort of bring their teams in and to spread the word and to sort of use that word of mouth to sort of bring people into the group, essentially. And it's really key to get people involved as well. Ask for contributions. The other key thing that I've found works really well is get external speakers as well, because often you can be very blinkered in your own organization. It's really good to get external speakers in to sort of talk about what they're doing. I used to get vendors in to talk about their specific technologies and actually use the community of practice to essentially evaluate that vendor product to say, do we want to use that within our organization or not? So you can really sort of not just bring speakers in, but empower the community to actually make a decision about, what's being shared with them. Advertising the agenda. This is a really silly thing, really, but really important. Advertise the agenda well in advance so people know what's going to be discussed and talked about, so they can actually decide whether they actually want to attend the meeting or the call in advance. And I think that's just part of the sort of publicity side of the community of practice. start monthly, but potentially, depending on the interest, you can sort of build up to be more frequently. I think I actually started one community where it was quarterly to start with, then went to monthly, and then it was sort of every other week, and then eventually weekly, just because we ended up having so much that we wanted to discuss, to talk about, and to decide, and that sort of drove the momentum and the frequency of the calls. For me, one of the key things with a community of practice is to actually make it feel like a working group, in the sense that it's not, you need to empower the community to make decisions and actually guide the use of the technology. I think this is the key to empowering the sustainability of a community of practice, to actually empower it to sort of almost determine its own fate by deciding what technologies, what vendor products you want to use, how you're going to use them, and to have that sort of set of objectives for the community, and to actually have some decisions and some deliverables off the back of that is probably the most important thing to actually drive the ongoing sustainability of the community of practice. And you know, when you look across the different types of groups you can have, so you can have a community of practice, you can have a more formal working group, steerco on top of that, or a sort of separate innovation group. I found out of all of those, a community of practice and a steerco are actually the most challenging to not necessarily set up, but to sustain longer term. So it is very challenging, but there are many things you can do to sort of help with that. So that's the initial sort of setup. The kind of continue to sort of build and grow it. Again, the word of mouth is really important. Use your initial group of people to help spread the word, to sort of talk to people in their parts of the organization, to essentially use them as recruiters to bring more people into the group. Get ideas from the group. What topics do they want to talk about? Again, empowering them to sort of actually drive the community themselves, and to really sort of, you know, dictate what they want out of the community as well. Also promote the outcomes. So if you are able to turn your community of practice into a slightly more sort of working group where you do have objectives and deliverables, these are really key to drive the growth and to drive the momentum. So once you're able to actually deliver one or two of these things, you can then promote that and share that externally, and share that with the management groups and the management teams to actually create that momentum and that sort of positive publicity, if you like, about what the community of practice is doing. And again, that's a really strong way to then recruit more people, because if people see, you know, things are getting done, things are happening, there's decisions being made, people want to be part of that. That's really key part of this. And the other thing that is really key with this as well is don't just rely on the meetings themselves. Try and get to a point where actually there's work to be done in between the meetings, you know, and, you know, nominate people to help drive some of those objectives and deliverables, and you know, see that as extra work that needs to be done ahead of the next community of practice, because it's always really powerful to show the rest of the community that you're making progress on some of these things from meeting to meeting. So again, these are all the things that really help to build the community, sustain it, and to get people sort of enthusiastic and motivated to participate themselves and to get involved. There's a funny statistic that you sort of hear about these kind of communities. It's sort of 99-1, so 90% of people just want to listen. 9% will get some level of involvement and participation, and 1% will actually be really proactive and help actually manage and move the community. And that, for me, that's a really interesting sort of way of slicing it up. But I think it's actually quite true, and it's a bit scary. And the key is actually identifying who is in that 9% and 1%, and really become their best friends and really empower them to help you sort of drive the community forward. It's really, really important. And then the maintain. So one of the key things I found was really important is really get as senior stakeholders' approval and advocacy of the group as possible. I was actually super naughty at Credit Suisse, so I set this group up without asking anyone's permission to do it. I just did it myself. I could see that we needed it. No one was doing it, so I just did it. And then eventually I got management approval, because by the time I started talking to the management about it, I'd already got a group of 40 or 50 people as part of the community across the organization. We were already doing, delivering some of our objectives, and it was a bit easier to get the approval then. But I got the head of architecture to be an advocate for what we were doing, and he would promote us throughout the organization. So it's super important to get that senior sort of stakeholder approval and to get them being your advocate for that community. As you progress, it's really important to sort of revise your objectives. So as a company, as your adoption of the technology that your community is focused on sort of matures, your objectives and deliverables will change over time. So it's really important to kind of refresh those and to sort of figure out what are the next things that's important for the community to sort of deliver. Always be recruiting members. It's something that you should never really stop doing, because over time new people join the firm, people leave. You need to have that continual sort of recruitment, and the reporting to the management is really important as well. I would make an effort to every couple of months produce a few sort of slides to sort of show the progress that we were making as a community of practice. How many new members had we got? Where are we with our different deliverables? What are the talks we did? Who did we bring in? All of that is really important to sort of again show the benefit of the community, and it's really key to sort of have that and to push that as a sort of way to promote this sort of to the senior management as well. And taking that one step further, potentially you could leverage this as an opportunity to actually get some funding to actually get a few people working on some of these deliverables as a sort of more full-time type of activity as well. So there is that route to actually turn this into, from a community of practice to eventually a kind of center of excellence, essentially. So there is that potential transition that you can sort of eventually sort of see as well. So those are the kind of 3 stages. Those are the sort of key things that I've found super useful to keep the momentum and keep the community alive and really delivering significantly. One of the things that I found really beneficial for me, and again, this was specific to the machine learning side of things, but I'm sure it applies to other technologies as well. What I found as I started to recruit people and network to find people to join the community of practice, there were people within the organization, what I would call hidden talent. There were people already there that had got an MSc in machine learning, but they weren't doing anything with it. So find those people that have either got a passion in the technology that the community is about, or have an ongoing interest in the technology. These are the passionate people that will really keep your community alive and really will want to get stuck in and start sort of helping deliver things as well. So it's really key to leverage that hidden talent and to find that hidden talent across the organization. As part of the innovation group I had, again, this was a sort of virtual innovation group, but we had 6 different technologies that we were interested in learning about, and we were then trying to, as a way to learn those technologies, we came up with a whole bunch of proof of concepts that allowed the group to learn the technology, to explore it, and eventually to produce something that we could then demonstrate to the business. This is how you might use blockchain or other technologies, and it really sort of helped the engagement with the business, but it showed our capability in the sort of innovation space as well. So that's really sort of key to engage with the sort of find the hidden talent. The other thing that's is almost alien to most organizations and can be really difficult concept, but embracing failure is really important when you're talking about new technologies. And what's super important is to have proof of concepts, but there shouldn't be an expectation that every proof of concept needs to enter into a production system and be a production deliverable. Proof of concepts can be simply there to help skill up the workforce to learn a bit about the technology. The key to this is actually when you select your different use cases to explore and to build proof of concepts, if something just doesn't seem to be working, and there can be many reasons why it won't work over and above just the technology is not the right fit. Don't be afraid. It's better to sort of fail fast, move on to the next thing, and just use that as a learning exercise. But for some organizations, for some managers, that can be really a difficult concept to deal with and to reconcile. But I think you have to embrace that and just say that this is just work we do as a learning exercise, and we just move on from that. Now, if you're lucky, 1 or 2 of these things might actually end up being sponsored as a business sort of project and sort of end up in a production system, and that's fantastic. And often that is the case, but there'll be many others that obviously don't get there. And this is essentially called the sort of funnel of innovation, essentially. But it's really key to not be scared to just say, right, that one's not working. Let's cancel that and just sort of get on to something else instead. As I've mentioned a couple of times, for me, one of the key things with the community of practice was actually coming up with a set of objectives and some deliverables off the back of that. So one of the things I did with the machine learning sort of community, one of the challenges we had as an organization was actually, is this use case a suitable use case for machine learning? And if so, what kind of machine learning? So we as a community actually came up with a questionnaire that could be used to evaluate use cases. And this became a standard method to evaluate potential use cases to see whether, it was the right kind of use case that machine learning technique could be used for. So this was a really powerful asset and deliverable that we produced fairly early on in the community, but we used that really powerfully because that was then shared across all the different siloed teams that were starting to adopt machine learning, they all found this super useful to help them evaluate specific use cases. So finding something quite simple that can be used widely is really powerful and shows the benefit of that community of practice really quite quickly. We did other things as well. So I mentioned we sort of got vendors in to present, and that was really powerful. And we actually used a TechRadar framework to start to evaluate different technologies as we were continuing. And again, this was really powerful for us to sort of decide which platforms, which frameworks, which tools we wanted to focus on and assess and actually adopt. So this was a really powerful ongoing way to empower the community to actually decide themselves what tools they felt were the best ones to use within the confines of the organization's sort of technology sort of footprint. So this was really powerful for us as an asset, and I think this can be applied across many different sort of technology areas, and it really sort of empowered the community to sort of take an opinion and discuss what they felt would be something that is something that should be used across the organization rather just in one particular team, etc. The other key thing as well I think is really important with a community of practice is to try and measure what is the adoption of the technology and where is that. And again, this is an example very much tailored to a sort of machine learning AI area, but the idea with this sort of framework was we could measure how mature we were across different types of machine learning, whether that's sort of analytics or automation or augmentation type of machine learning, and to really be able to sort of track over time our adoption. I think this this sort of way of being able to track the progress of the adoption of these new technologies, again, it's a great thing as a community to be aware of and to sort of have that sort of tracking, if you like, and it's really powerful again to sort of cascade up the organization as well. Other sort of things that we did as part of this was as a community we decided to set up a sort of code sharing for the community. So one of the big benefits was that we could support each other by sharing code across the different teams, which again, when you're in a sort of siloed organization, that can be can be more difficult than it needs to be sometimes. So again, there was a real benefit from doing that, and actually building a repository of use cases that different teams were tackling was really useful as well, because when other teams wanted to do a similar kind of use case, they could talk to the team that had already done it and sort of share experiences and learning, and even potentially leverage the same techniques as well. So there's so many positive things out of the community of practice if you're able to set up a lot of these tools and sort of assets and deliverables, if you like, that allow a lot of sort of cross-fertilization and sharing across the different parts of the organization. So super important sort of part of that. Challenges, well, so I've talked about many of these, I think, as I've gone through this. It isn't easy. I think there are many hurdles along the way. I think what's almost frustrating is it can be very easy to get a community of practice off the ground. And I think as, organisers of that, you almost get overconfident too quickly, because the first few meetings go really well, everyone's enthusiastic. But I've seen so many times just the momentum drops off really quickly. And, often these are sort of extracurricular things. People have got their day job as well. And it's really difficult to sort of keep the momentum. And what I've found is, trying to empower people it's not just about learning and knowledge sharing. This is about decision making and accelerating the adoption of the technology, and just, giving the power to the community, if you like, to help make some of those decisions and to guide the adoption of the technology with the firm is really a powerful way to sustain that community. And I've, for me, that's the only true way to keep that community alive. And there are other aspects, of course. So, you can have a community of practice that, is just meeting quarterly just to share updates from different parts of the organization. That's great. And, if that's all you want out of that community of practice, then that's fine. But I think where you really get that long-term engagement is when you empower the group to really sort of deliver things as part of that. And it is tough. And I think the sort of 99-1 is really the key sort of problem, if you like, with these community of practices. What you'll end up is there'll be a really small core group of people that are really going to help you keep the momentum going. And the real key is identifying those individuals and really sort of giving them ownership and making them drive that community along with you, and empowering them. So it's that 9 and 1% of the group that you want to identify and leverage, and really sort of empower them to sort of build and drive the community going forward. So the 3 key sort of action points. Number 1, just make the community practice valuable to every member. And I think that's super important. And I think as part of that, acknowledging different people will want slightly different things out of the community of practice. As I mentioned before, some are just looking to learn, and they're a complete novice with the tech. They don't feel empowered to sort of contribute, but they just want to learn, and they're just there to listen and to sort of learn from what others are saying and sharing, whereas others really want to be empowered and sort of really help drive things forward. For me, this is the key thing. Define objectives and deliverables. Make the community of practice feel a bit more like a working group. Give them something to do, to deliver. Give them an objective or a number of objectives. The working group I had, we listed 10 objectives. Some were quite simple ones to deliver. Others were much longer term objectives and deliverables, but that gave us a purpose. It gave us a reason for being, and I think it's super important to have that. And then, number 3, find that sort of that 9 and 1%, or the 10%, if you like, of the community that are really going to be engaged, proactive, and really help you drive the community forward. Find those key people and, make them your best friends, empower them to help with the management and driving of that community. So for me, those are the 3 key things that can really help you sustain a community of practice. Next steps. So I think, off the back of this, we'd be very happy to sort of come in and sort of spend a half day workshop with you, actually getting into a lot more detail. I think with these community of practices, and every organisation is slightly different. The objectives might be slightly different. The structure may be different, and actually honing things specifically to that, can be sort of worked through during a workshop. And then either we would be very happy to sort of spend a sort of 3-month period to come in and help you set up and mobilize that community of practice, or potentially even doing a community of practice as a service, essentially. So come in to actually set up, build and maintain and sort of manage that as an ongoing activity. So that's pretty much it from me. So I'm very much happy now to spend the next sort of 10-15 minutes on any questions that you guys might have.
Great, Andy, thank you so much for that. We've actually had a couple of questions fired through during the session, so I'll just read these out, and also it'll give people a chance to continue sending in more questions. Just as a reminder, if you ping them across in the chat box, and we can read those out. So the first one is, how long would you say it takes to actually set up and establish a community of practice?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think what I find is if you know the organisation and sort of key players in the organisation, actually getting an initial sort of core group of people can be quite quick. And as I mentioned, the first meeting I had with my machine learning working group, I think we had 3 or 4 people on the very first meeting, but it got up to 100+ people within a couple of months. So you can build it quite quickly, and I think depending on the excitement around the technology. So at the time, machine learning was super new and super exciting. So it was actually quite easy to get people joining. But I think the majority were part of that 90% where they just wanted to hear and learn rather than maybe help drive things forward. But that's great as well. The setting it up and sort of building it to a sort of critical mass will take a couple of months, I would suggest, and then it's just about sustaining it and keeping it operational and just sort of gradually adding more people in over time.
Great, thanks, Andy. Next question is around sort of the major benefits that you've seen and that you've experienced from setting up a community of practice, and I guess looking at what outcomes organisations can expect to see.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there are many different benefits from a community of practice. So I think there's a load of benefits for individuals and for the employees who are part of the community of practice, obviously to learn what's going on in other parts of the organization that they just may not sort of know about or hear about, actually helping them and encouraging them to sort of skill up in some of the new technologies as well, to sort of build their network of people that sort of know those technologies, to get involved into sort of doing some proof of concepts in those new technologies. So I think those are many of the sort of benefits from an individual perspective. I think from an organizational perspective, actually, community of practices are really helping to move your employees to the latest technologies and the new skill sets. I think it's also giving you that sort of innovation perspective where you're looking at how these technologies can be used in specific situations and specific use cases. So it's really helping you push forward on your innovation activities. in combination with, I'm sure, other, more formalized innovation programs, but the community of practices are kind of can be the grassroots part of that, and really, often sort of the workforce is closer to the business problems, and for them understanding what the different technologies can do. They will be closer to sort of spotting that actually we could use this technology to solve this business problem. So I think that's really powerful from an organization perspective. And I think, the other part of this is actually helping to drive the adoption and the deciding on the architecture and the technology vendors that the organization want to work with as well. It's really, I got a lot of positive feedback from the architecture teams, because they saw a lot of value in these communities and really supporting their activities as part of that. And actually, we, as part of the community I had, we actually created a architectural blueprint that then got reviewed by the sort of head of architecture at the firm, and it can really drive many different things from an organization perspective as well. So there are many benefits both for the individuals and for the organization with these community practices, and that's why I'm quite passionate about sort of having these and sustaining them, because I think setting them up is quite easy. Keeping them going is where the real challenge is.
Great, thanks, Andy. And would you be able to expand on how you would use a hackathon within a community of practice?
Yeah. So there's different ways actually. So I've seen things being done in different ways. So often we would do a kind of virtual hackathon where you would sort of allocate a week, and so people wouldn't necessarily spend normally you'd spend a couple of days just full on doing a hackathon, and that's okay, but it's quite difficult to free 2 full days from people. What we would do is a kind of virtual hackathon that would maybe span a week or a couple of weeks, even longer. But it's kind of like a mini proof of concept, but you would, as part of that, the teams would come up with an idea, start building it out, and then sort of present it at the end of the week, that kind of thing. So doing, slightly rethinking the format of the hackathon to enable more people to get involved and to sort of be able to sort of duck in and out of that, in addition to still doing your day job, as it were, can work quite nicely.
Thanks, Andy. Next question. So we are setting up communities of practice for dev architects and other roles as well. This seemed focused on dev, which is their area, but are there different approaches, for example, for BAs and architects? This person's given the example that architects have invited them to their community of practice as an observer, but they don't want to end up with new silos.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and what I ended up having is architects wanted to be part of the sort of the dev community of practice, because we were getting to the point of talking about architecture and designs and sort of what are the right tools that we should be using. So I think there's definitely benefit to make it sort of multidisciplined, and as I mentioned, the working group that I had at Credit Suisse was actually both business and IT as well. So we had business users, business groups part of the group. So everyone was welcome, and I think it's good to have all the different perspectives and different roles as part of it. And I think it actually makes the community a lot richer. having those different perspectives. You, as part of that, sometimes you do get a little bit of conflict from time to time. So sometimes you end up being a little bit of a referee, if that's the right way to describe it. But often, there might be differences of opinion that sort of come out of the discussions, and sometimes I would have to say, right, this is great, but let's take this offline and sort of maybe set up a separate meeting to sort of get into the detail of that. But often these are positive conflicts, because you're always, with a big group, you're going to get people with slightly different opinions and different viewpoints. So part of a leader of a community of practice is actually taking a bit of a referee sort of role sometimes. But I think it's much richer if you bring the different roles into the same community, personally.
Great, thank you, Andy. And next question is, what is the best frequency for community of practice meetings? How often would you advise?
That's a fantastic question. So the simple answer is it depends, and I know that's a massive cop-out, so let me expand on that a bit better. So for the community of practice that I was sort of running, we started off monthly, and we would keep to that monthly meeting where it was more of a kind of update and knowledge sharing. So we'd have speakers in on those monthly calls. But then what we found is there were so many things we were trying to do and deliver. We would have sort of weekly meetings as well that maybe are more focused on maybe one of the deliverables. So we'd have a specific meeting to talk about the question, to finalize the design of the questionnaire, or to, sort of update the TechRadar or whatever. So I ended up having specific meetings for specific actions, if you like, but we'd always have the big monthly meeting where we'd have maybe a guest speaker, or we'd have a couple of different teams presenting what they've been doing in a specific area. I think the other thing you can do is mix up whether you sort of have in-person meetings or sort of online virtual meetings as well.
Great. Okay, Andy, I think that's all for questions today. So obviously you've popped your the email address. If anyone does want to get in touch, please do send any further questions that you have, or if you're interested in the workshop or any further services around sort of building and maintaining your community of practice, then please do get in touch on that email, and Andy and myself will be happy to follow up and get some time booked in.
Fantastic, thank you.
Great.
I hope everyone has enjoyed the session.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.